Good morning everyone, and welcome to this first video in our series about sensory processing. This is an introduction to sensory processing, we're just going to tell you a little bit about what sensory processing is and how that might affect our children and young people. We're going to go on to do a few other videos about the different senses and some practical activities that you can do to support your children at home. As many of you already know, I run the sensory processing workshop for Umbrella. I'm a trained occupational therapist and I have done some recent update training in sensory processing. I am, however, not an occupational therapist trained in sensory processing. I don't have the relevant qualifications for assessments. So this video is about what sensory processing is. So let's get started. Sensory processing is the process by which we receive information from our senses and use it to understand the environment we're in, understand our body and interact with the world. So as neurotypical adults, we've got an unconscious ability to respond appropriately to sensory input and to maintain an optimum sense of alertness, and that's called sensory modulation. So we know as adults how to regulate our own bodies because of the sensory input that we've got coming in. For example, we know if we feel too warm, we'll remove our jumper. We know if we feel too cold, we'll put on an extra layer. If we start to feel drowsy, we might get up and start to move around or have a cold drink. We know if our environment's too loud, so we'll turn down our music or we'll move away from noise if we can. We can regulate ourselves and maintain an optimum level of alertness that's not too high and not too low. For a child with sensory processing difficulties, they'll find it harder to self-regulate and become overwhelmed really quickly. So a child with sensory processing difficulties, for them everyday experiences can be overwhelming. Their body receives too much sensory input and this is called being over-responsive. But also for some children, the regular environment isn't stimulating enough, so they don't receive enough information through their senses, and that's called being under-responsive. Children can be under-responsive in some areas and over-responsive in others, and so this may also change frequently, and that's a child's sensory profile. So working out a sensory profile can be really tricky and needs the input of an occupational therapist or other therapists that's trained in sensory integration theory. However, you can keep records for yourself of what your child enjoys or doesn't enjoy, which will help you to build up an overall picture of where your child's sensory profile sits. For example, they may enjoy sour foods or like to be hugged tightly or enjoy repetitive rocking or spinning. This will all tell you about their sensory profile. It's important to understand your child's sensory profile so that we can figure out the best way to support them and the best way to introduce the right sensory input for them into their lives, which will help them feel calm and regulated and stay at that just right level. We do have a form that you can record that on, so if anybody would like that, you can drop us an email or drop us a message on our Facebook pages or pop a message underneath this video on Facebook and we'll pop that over to you via email. So this was our whistle-stop tour of sensory processing. It should be enough just to give you a little bit of an idea about what your child or young person may be experiencing and why. In the next video in the series, we'll take a practical look at the senses and how we can support children with sensory processing difficulties to regulate. Thank you for watching.